Well, gentlemen, thank you for finding the time to talk with me.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
uh, and I guess this is a fascinating, this is a fascinating story because I've I've been looking at this trend of the splitting up of the role of the chief executive of an NCI designated cancer center. And I'm finding quite a few, and it's interesting because it kind of crept up, because you started with Moffat, I guess, 12 years ago. And then I'm seeing more and more and more. And unless you're really monitoring who is the PI on the CCSG every year or every cycle, you really don't see it. And so now we see it. What is happening? How did it happen at Oregon?
Well, I would just start by saying I've been in the role for 17 years, and there are a number of factors that we're facing. And first of all, the demands on a CCSG designated director have increased almost exponentially in terms of the requirements for obtaining and maintaining your NCI designation. At the same time, there have been increasing demands on the clinical enterprise in terms of managing our patients, growing our oncology volumes, increasing revenue, and helping the finances of our healthcare institutions. So when you combine those demands and try to have one person do all the things from manage the clinical enterprise to manage the CCSG, it seems natural that it's almost too much for one person these days. And following the example of Moffitt and Huntsman and many others, it just made sense for us to do this. And also, when you couple that with the amount that we've grown over the last decade, and we've hired well over 1,000 people at the Knight Cancer Institute, not all faculty, but just in terms of the size, the scope, the scale, it just got to be too much for one person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this was recent, but Tom, how did this come about for you?
Well, it came about because I've been a colleague of Brian for many years and made a decision that I wanted to live in Portland for one. So much like the young people these days, you decide where you're going to live and then what you're going to do. And I've been kept keeping in touch with Brian from time to time just to see how things are going. And as you know, I got into a consulting advising position, helping other centers with CCSGs, and dropped Brian a note one day and said, "Hey, just love to catch up and see how you're doing." And he asked me how things were going. And I said, "Really great." And then I paused and he said, "But?" And I said, "It's going really well, Brian. I feel like I'm contributing, but I miss being around people. And I spend a lot of time with my laptop and I have lots of great meetings, but the human interaction and being part of that environment is something that I miss." And I know the pandemic affected a lot of people in that regards, but Brian said, "Tom, might have an opportunity for you." And that led to joining in a half-time role as the chief research officer. And the workload only increased over that year. And although I was trying to help out as much as I could with Brian, it was clear that what was needed was more than that. And I was just all too willing to be involved with this terrific organization in a bigger role.
Mm-hmm. Brian, is that what you were thinking? Were you
Yeah,
thinking of that role or that role, or which role did you have in
yeah,
mind?
as Tom has alluded to, I've been thinking about taking this path for several years. And when Tom contacted me, and he and I, as he indicated, he and I have worked together for many, many years. And to have somebody with his level of expertise, who's already been a director of an NCI designated cancer center, has been in a center where they had a dual CEO cancer center director split. What an ideal opportunity for us. So somebody that I know, I like, experienced, that checked all my boxes as far as somebody I want to have at my institution.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom, since you were at that center that actually started the trend, I think, Is that correct?
I don't remember exactly if Moffitt was the first or not, but it was certainly one of the early adopters.
Yeah, so, and since you were also consulting with cancer centers, um, you should be really in position to declare something a trend. Because I should be careful as a reporter, I can declare one data point a trend. But you actually know what a trend is in this case. Is this a trend to split up these jobs?
Well, just to echo what Brian was saying earlier, the role of being the director of an NCI center has increased. There's new mandates. Community outreach and engagement is a huge thing. Now there's plan to enhance diversity and the cancer research education and training. The expectation of having influence over the cancer service line has taken this from what is theoretically a 0.5 position to something much greater than that. And to do justice to all that needs to be done, we're all humans. We're not superhumans, and it takes a team. And I think that what we're seeing is a trend that will continue because it's not getting easier; it's getting more complex. Especially all of the pressures facing academic medicine is just pulling us in different directions, and more firepower is going to be, I think, really important.
But you guys get along, so it's great. But can you see a nightmare scenario in something like this? Because I've seen it in sort of other settings. This is too new a trend now that we know it's a trend.
Well, I think that having really clear roles and responsibilities is critical. And that's one of the things that Brian and I have talked about and recognized from the very beginnings. And as Brian was saying earlier, having been through that transition, what did you find that worked? Were there any things that were helpful to avoid confusion? And you just have to have good communication, I think, and Brian and I have that.
What are your roles and responsibilities now?
Yeah, it's a long list.
Yeah, well, it's still a long list, even split. Yes. But what is it?
Brian, do you want to start with yours?
Yeah, so I'll start on mine. Predominantly are on the clinical enterprise, and that's to ensure that we're recruiting and managing all the patients in our institution optimally, and that I'm also, my other role is to interface with our community. I'm obviously a well-recognized figure in our community and have deep connections to the philanthropic community in Portland and our region. So I continue to ensure that I manage those relationships, and that, as I said, I'm really responsible for leading our clinical enterprise. And that's a huge, Paul, that's a huge role. And, we see thousands of patients every year. We have aspirations to grow, as do most cancer centers and cancer programs. And that in itself is a full-time job.
And how has it grown? It's your patient volume must have been. I mean, this was a sleepy little institution.
Yeah.
You joined it.
Yes. Well, we've practically doubled over the last decade, and we're continuing to grow. And part of that's demographics, as you well know, and our population is aging, and cancer incidence goes up with age. So there's a little bit of a natural increase in the numbers of cancer patients that are in our catchment area. So we need to ensure that we increase our capacity to manage that, but also we want to make sure that we're serving all of our communities and become a destination center for at least our region by offering the things that can't be offered elsewhere. For example, we're the only transplant center between Seattle and Sacramento. And so that's a pretty large swath of territory when you look at the geography. So those are the sorts of things that we need to be able to offer to to people in our region and to make sure we have that capacity.
Yeah, yeah, and you've been particularly good at raising money for the center. So that alone, just focusing on that is quite something.
Yes, and with budgets being flat at NIH and NCI, we have to look at all possibilities, including relationships with industry and relationships with our philanthropic community.
Mhm, mhm. Well, you're still on a board, right? Or a pharma company board,
Yes, that's
I
correct.
believe.
I'm Amgen.
You can continue to do that.
I will continue to do that. And Paul, it's been a remarkable learning experience for me as a leader, and to be on a board with spectacular leaders, titans of industry. And I get a lesson every time I go to one of those meetings in terms of how a well-run company runs. And that's really helped me crystallize my own thoughts about a transition like this.
Oh, interesting. So that connects with being on the board at Amgen and learning how that works?
Yes.
How?
Well, it's just, again, I view it as a well-run, of course, I'm biased and have a conflict there, but I view it as an incredibly well-run company. And just to be around people that have run very large companies and be able to ask them for advice, that's extremely helpful.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And Tom, what's your job now?
I can make it as simple as three main areas.
Mhm.
So the first is a cancer center support grant. And as we've discussed already, there are many moving parts there. The second is the chief operating officer reports to me. And so although this is a matrix cancer center, we still have our own HR, we have our administrative support, those kinds of activities. I work on that part of the operations to make sure that they're going well, meeting the needs of the faculty, staff. And then because of Brian's prowess in raising money, there's major initiatives that we have ongoing that complement the NCI designation, but they're things that are distinct from it. I won't say distinct, but don't have the same level of connection. And that is our initiative in precision oncology and early detection. And that was largely supported with philanthropy. And so those are major initiatives, lots of staffing space, and making sure that those are successful is the third part of my mission. I think the underlying current for all of this is to continue to make sure that the Knight Cancer Institute is a destination
Mhm.
for faculty. Brian talked about for patients, but for faculty and staff, because this is a knowledge-based industry, you win with talent. And we are competing with the very best centers across the country, and we want to make sure that they make the right decision. And so when there's fortunately an opportunity for them to join this organization, they realize that this is the place to go and their potential impact is where it is. And so there's a lot of things that we can do to win in the competition for talent. And those are some of the things that I'm spending time with.
Mhm. 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 Plus, of course, you've done it before. You really know how to do this job. Yeah. Yeah. And this is different from what you were doing before at Moffitt, or?
It's similar, but the difference is that we have a lot more resources here and things that are unrelated to the Cancer Center Support Grant, i.e. not directly funded by it, part of the supervision. But yes, I think that my position before required more interaction with the government because of the direct connection on the state support of the Cancer Center. So I haven't been called to help Brian with any of that, but I don't know, Brian, is there something that you're supposed to be telling me about going down to?
I'm happy to handle that part as well.
Good
Oh,
answer.
interesting. But it was also, speaking of hires, I mean, what a great hire, uh, Brian, to do this. I mean, what did you think when you got the call from Tom saying, well, an email from him?
Yes. I immediately saw this as an opportunity. Somebody with his experience, and I'm going to back up just 1 second. One of the things that I'm really proud of at the Knight Cancer Institute that we've developed is we've a focus on culture. And it's a culture of being bold, taking, starting bold new things. And I think we have a solid history of doing that, but also being cooperative, collaborative, and supportive of one another and working well as a team. And we've emphasized that. And when Tom reached out to me, I knew that Tom would fit that culture perfectly in terms of taking risks, but also being collegial and cooperative and collaborative. And that's a key tenet of the type of people we're trying to recruit. And we've had any number of people who've come through who commented. Some people talk about it, but we see that you're truly doing that. And that's always makes me incredibly pleased by what we've built here. And that's why I thought Tom would be such a perfect fit.
Mhm, mhm. I'm speaking of that opportunity because Tom would have really stuck around at Moffitt for decades, had it not been for these events, which I still do not really understand, and I never claim to have ever understood them. Is there any clarity that you can introduce here?
Yeah. So, it's interesting, Paul, but you will never see a public statement saying, oh, we evaluated all these claims and didn't find any substance there. You'd only find something if something of substance was found. But we absolutely did our due diligence looking at any possible claim regarding Tom's departure from Moffitt, and we found absolutely no evidence that any claims that were made had any substance to them. So we were completely comfortable that hiring Tom was nothing but an opportunity.
Tom, do you want to say anything on this?
It's easy with the benefit of hindsight to look back at one's career and what we've learned along the way through mentorship and sponsorship. And I've had many opportunities along the way and believe that I'm here because of those opportunities that were given to me. And I feel really fortunate to share those experiences and my enthusiasm, which I think is unquenchable, to be a part of this organization that Brian has built over the last 17 years. So I'm really appreciative to my former employers and sponsors and mentors because I wouldn't be here if I had not had those opportunities.
Yeah, and I never understood, and I still don't understand what happened at Moffat. I really don't. That's for what it's worth, because we looked pretty closely at that as well, trying to figure it out. And the more we looked, the less we understood. So there's no clarity on this other than it's BS. So.
That was yes, putting it politely, yes, that was our view.
Right, right. Is there anything that you would like to bring up? Anything you want to talk about? Anything?
So, Paul, one of the things that I just want to, I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent, but since I've got you, part of the reason that my role on the clinical enterprise is so critically important is the way that we've set it up. And I'm going to take you back through a little bit of additional history. But as you know, most cancer center directors, when they talk to their dean or the head of the hospital, they want to have a funds flow model. And by a funds flow model, it's if the oncology enterprise achieves above a certain percent growth or margin or profit, a percentage of that comes back directly to the cancer center. The problem with those models is that if you're really successful and your university is struggling, a dean or a president is going to look at that model and say, we just sent $50 million to the cancer center. We need that to grow these other programs. This doesn't make any sense. So what you end up with a funds flow model is you end up fighting over money.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've looked at those models, what we did at the Knight Cancer Institute was try to think, is there a different way where everybody wins? And so we've set up a model where we have a little bit more autonomy. And in exchange for that, we set some growth targets with the hospital. But what we say to them is that our expenses, so for example, our clinical research expenses, go above the line, meaning that comes out of the hospital budget. Our biostatistics, our diagnostic laboratories, and many of our recruitments come out of our budgeted. And so what we've done is we've included that as a budget item. We've committed to certain growth targets, but then all the money that we generate goes back to the hospital and the School of Medicine to invest however they want. So we're working together to grow as opposed to fighting over money. And it's worked incredibly well. Everybody's happy. The hospital's happy because we're generating a decent margin for the hospital. We're happy because a lot of our expenses are covered. And so again, and yes, of course they continue to invest in our growth because we're a great place to invest for growth, and that leads to more revenue for all the other missions. But we're not fighting over money, which a funds flow model is inherently sets that up. So again, I think we've established, but the point that I'm getting at is that because of that model, I have an enormous amount of responsibility at the institutional level. Because the cancer service line always is going to be critical, but I'm an integral part of the institution and the institutional leadership on the clinical enterprise. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the difference between, again, a funds flow model and basically an expense model.
When did you put that together? How long have you had the expense model?
That's been about 3.5 years now.
Does anyone else have it?
I think this is absolutely novel and unique to our institution.
Interesting. I was wondering if we could just even do a separate look at it and kind of like a case study. Is that something you would be open to?
I would. That's part of the reason I brought that up, is that I think it's the way for cancer centers and institutions to do better at collaborating and cooperating instead of fighting over money.
Can I on record invite you to write a piece about this?
Yeah.
Put it on
Yeah.
the cover for sure. You
Yeah.
have to beat.
No, again, I think and part of the reason that I like this, Paul, is that in many institutions, you'll have this tension between, is the dean stronger or is the cancer center director have a stronger position?
Yeah.
What this does, it aligns us. And so this to me is sustainable. So if the dean gets replaced, I don't have to worry that they're going to come after our funds. If I'm replaced, I don't have to worry that my replacement is going to be in a weakened position with regards to the dean or the hospital in terms of this model. So to me, this is a sustainable model that outlasts both the dean and cancer center director.
Fascinating. Because it's kind of a classic story in oncology, being a fight with the dean.
Yeah. And so again, this is a way that I think we figured out a way where we actually collaborate and cooperate, because if I'm successful, they're successful, and vice versa.
Oh, wow. I love tangents. Tom, do you have a tangent?
Well, and actually, I want to stick with that and just ask, Paul, you probably remember when the University of Michigan first rolled out this cancer service line margin, and it was published, and it became, everybody tried to emulate that.
Yeah.
To Brian's point, it became so successful that it was not sustainable. So they no longer do that at the University of Michigan because it wasn't, the funds weren't going where they needed to benefit the entire organization. So what Brian has created is a sustainable model that really makes it wonderful to be in the position of being a director of a cancer center where you're not having to fight for two nickels to rub together, that there is a strong commitment and a sustainability that allows us to focus on science rather than the business of science. Now, we won't talk about the funding at NIH because it is a different model, and we do have to continue what's been in place here for years, and that is working successfully with industry and venture philanthropy rather than just giving us, invest in us. And that's what makes it such a really wonderful place to be at this time in cancer. There's just so much that we can do.
Well, what about NCI funding now? How is that affecting you? It's probably not affecting you a whole lot because of the wonderful fundraising you do.
Yes, well, we've been fortunate that we've done really well with recruitment, so our NCI funding has increased, not decreased. And we've been able to fill in gaps with philanthropic funds, but then also in putting some of the expenses into the model that we've developed. So we've actually done quite well.
So that you're not losing sleep over the fact that the appropriations are a mess and that.
I wouldn't say we're not losing a lot of sleep, but we worry a lot about our investigators and their sustainability. And one of the things we did during the pandemic is we put aside some additional funds for all of our investigators. We recently appropriated some additional funds to help our investigators, buy a small piece of equipment or help with some animal costs. So we're always looking for ways to help our investigators, recognizing that they're increasingly being asked to do more and more with less and less.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I guess getting back to some of our old coverage, you were focusing on pre-cancers, and that's going well, I presume.
Yes, it's going extremely well. And we're learning an enormous amount about early cancer detection, about the evolution of the biology from pre-cancer to cancer. And I know that you've covered a lot on the multi-cancer early detection tests. And believe in them or not, they're an amazing testament to science in terms of moving forward with better early detection technologies that are likely to be, I think, ultimately will save thousands and thousands, if not millions, of lives if appropriately applied and live up to their potential and promise.
Mm-hmm. How do you appropriately apply them? Is that becoming clearer, or is
There's a lot to be learned. Yeah, that's a really great question, and we realize the challenges in terms of translation, implementation. What is the public education understanding? What about the healthcare systems and how they're going to deal with this onslaught of information? Because whether we're ready for it or not, the technology is being marketed, and so patients are coming with questions. So there's so much that needs to be done, and we need to start answering those questions now, not waiting for these to be FDA approved. It kind of reminds me of when BRCA1 and BRCA2 were cloned, and you could get genetic testing, but we didn't know what to tell the patients who found out they had a mutation. Now we've got not only early detection, early diagnosis, but we've got evidence of somebody who's on the path towards malignancy. So what are we going to do in those situations if somebody's taken 2 or 3 steps? Can we put an end to that path? Can we reverse it? And so there's all kinds of really important mechanistic, biologic, clinical, population health questions, behavioral questions that we feel like we have the opportunity and perhaps the responsibility to contribute to that dialogue. It will change how we view cancer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's amazing. I guess I should probably ask both of you and I've probably asked it in the same question 4 or 5 different ways already. But what keeps you up at night? What are the problems? What are you most worried about?
I think that we're at I don't know if it's an inflection point, but there's been a consistent challenge, as you alluded to, Paul, with NIH funding and being able to sustain what needs to be done when our government has so many competing priorities, that the traditional model of academic medicine, academic researchers requires some changes. And what that looks like is not totally clear at this point. I heard somebody tell me about, I think it was 8 years ago, made a comment that there is more money being spent on cancer research today than there ever has been. It's just not coming from the government. So when it's harder and harder for people to get their R01s funded and the size of the grants is not sustainable, we need to think about creative ways to sustain the research mission and what needs to be done. And we're not the only place that's thinking about that, but you can either be proactive or reactive, and we're being proactive.
Mhm.
And for Paul, I think you know me well enough to know that I'm always looking toward the future. And for me, it's how do we move forward faster? And what can we and I do to help make that happen? And yes, there's lots of hurdles, lots of political battles we have to fight. But I'm always looking toward what can we do to help patients have better outcomes, maybe not get cancer in the first place, maybe intercept their cancers so that that precancerous lesion doesn't turn into cancer. Or if somebody has advanced cancer, what can we do to make their outcomes better and their journey a more a better journey for them? And then how do we do this equitably? And there's just so much we need to be doing. And so, yeah, there's a lot of noise out there, but I stay focused on what can we do to make things better.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, is there anything I forgot to ask?
You're pretty experienced, Paul.
Thank you so much. Thank you for finding the time to talk to me and to walk me through all this.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Paul. We really appreciate it.